Hello friends, I am Chevy. Welcome to my shed. How are you today? How's life in your world? How's things where you are? I hope everything is good and great and wonderful and fantastic and all of those things. We have the coffee and we have the Kindle, so this is gonna be a long one. Buckle up. That's not true. But today we are going to review Stephen King's The Shining. And this is going to be a little bit of a different review, and it's probably going to have spoilers spread all throughout. So if you've never read it or you've never seen the movie and you're interested, you can skip. But I read this more as an exercise than for enjoyment. That's not to say I didn't enjoy the book. I did. I'll tell you right up front. I thought it was pretty captivating. But I read this because of the book that I'm working on. If you don't know, it's currently National Novel Writing Month, and I was struggling through the midpoint of my book and really wanting to figure out a way to close this thing out and actually hit the 50,000 word goal. And so I thought maybe reading a little King would help me, and it did tremendously. So here's the thing. The Shining. John Torrance, has an alcohol problem, was raised in an abusive household, has been abusive himself, has hurt his son before, has hurt his wife. He's trying to get sober. He lost his job because he basically beat the crap out of a student. He was a teacher, aspiring writer, gets kicked out of his private school job and has to take whatever's available to him. His friend Al, who he's been detoxing with or going through the sobriety with, is a member on a board at a hotel in Colorado and says, I can get you a job there as the winter keeper and you can work on your writing while you're there. And Jack says, great, I'll take whatever I can get. We head to the Overlook. We find out that through all of this that Jack's son Danny has some sort of special gift. He has a little bit of maybe precognition and maybe a little bit of telepathy or remote viewing. And his Danny's mom and dad, Jack and Wendy, know about it, and they're kind of weirded out by it. But they've chalked it up to being he's a 5-year-old boy, he has an active imagination, whatever. Cut to, we are now at the Overlook Hotel, which has a sordid history, and Danny there meets a man who basically tells him he has something called the Shining or the Shine, and Danny's very strong with it, stronger than this man's ever seen, and it allows them to see things that other people can't see, and allows them to communicate, and he and this man basically have a conversation without talking. They have a telepathic conversation, and he tells Danny to avoid some stuff in the house, or in the hotel, and that's it. Now it's these 3 people in this hotel who live out the winter, and the hotel slowly takes over Jack's mind and convinces him to kill his family. A former keeper named Grady killed his family there, and they see some crazy shit happening in the hotel. The elevator starts working. They all hear voices, including Wendy. Danny's tragically affected multiple times throughout the book. And, it all comes down to Jack finally breaks. The hotel finally has control of him, and he, nearly kills Wendy and goes to attack Danny. And in the end, Danny stands firm. He stands his ground and talks his dad down, and his dad, gathers a stroke of his own humanity and tells Danny to run, and he does. And then the place blows up. It's a very interesting story because it's not very interesting. And what I mean by that is it kind of ties into the reason why I read this book. This is a 200,000 word book. That's a big book. 200,000 words. And in the grand scheme of things, in reading fiction and reading especially fantastical fiction, I'm not going to call this fantasy, but a lot of people would. I'm going to call this fantastical fiction or speculative fiction. In the grand scheme of things, a 200,000 word book is kind of normal for a for a story that encompasses a continent or takes characters across a long journey in a battle and all that sort of stuff. In this book, though, King in 200,000 words does very, very little. Not a whole lot happens. It's a family. There's moments of family eating dinner. There's moments of Jack going at a wasp's nest and getting stung, and then giving the wasp, he thinks he cleaned out the wasp's nest, gives it to his son who puts it in his room, and he wakes up covered in wasps. It was probably the hotel, we as the reader are led to believe, but nobody ever says that. It's Jack spending hours in a basement looking through old documents and trying to uncover what happened in this hotel. It's Wendy cooking for them and trying to talk Jack down from doing crazy things. And it's Danny, telepathically knowing that his daddy wants to do the bad thing, which is to get drunk. And King spends 200,000 words on a very small story in terms of scale. It's a very minute story. It's very... I don't want to say basic, because it's not. It's a pretty broad, but it's a very minute, very condensed story. And King manages to do it on this huge scale, and he does it because throughout this book we've got the three characters. Well, technically four if you count Dick, who is the cook that Danny talked to in the beginning. He comes back later in the book. Danny projects to him, and he comes back to the Overlook, and so we get a few POV chapters through him. You've got Danny, Jack, and Wendy, and those are the three POVs that we follow for the most part throughout this book. And the reason this book is 200,000 words is because we spend an intimate amount of time in their head. We spend an intimate amount of time with their thoughts, and their thoughts are not always about the present. Their thoughts are often interrupted by bizarre visions or flashbacks to traumas or whatever. I would say that any other writer who was going to set out to write this story would probably only do it in 80 or 90,000 words. King takes that extra 100,000 words to make sure that you, the reader, are really a part of this book, that you become one of these characters, that you empathize with all of them. Even Jack, the guy who finally snaps, who the hotel finally takes over and attempts to kill his family, you become sympathetic with him. And you hope that he can pull out of it. And in the end, he kind of does, for just a second, after he's already done some very horrific things. And that's what I wanted. The story that I'm writing is roughly along that same scale. It's a very compact story. It's a, stranger wanders into a town. The town has a problem. He has to help them out and figure out how to solve this problem. And I'm struggling to hit 50,000 words. I'm really struggling to make that mark. And so I picked this book because I wanted to know, first of all, I absolutely adore Kubrick's version of this story. I think that it's a cinematic masterpiece. I understand that Stephen King does not like Stanley Kubrick's version, and I get it. Now that I've read the book and I've listened to King's arguments, I've heard his arguments in the past, and I've dismissed them. Like, in the past, I've always thought, yeah, that doesn't matter. One of Stephen King's big complaints is that the casting of Jack Nicholson was just wrong because from scene one, Jack Nicholson already appears crazy. And in this book, it's a slow build. Jack in the book goes through a very slow metamorphic process. That's why it takes 200,000 pages, because it's not fast. In the movie, it's very fast. Like, Jack's basically crazy right out of the gate because Jack Nicholson has got that kind of crazy look about him. King also complains that Wendy is just this super misogynistic, dumb, housewife in the movie. And in this book, she's a very strong person. She gives in to her husband because that's what the housewife does, but she also doesn't, and she fights back. And that's the character that King wanted to see. Whereas in the movie, so I get those complaints. The thing is, though, that this book, this 200,000 words, really is a short story stretched to 200,000 words. And a movie tells this story in a very concise, quick, easy to consume way, and I think that Stanley Kubrick's version did a great job. Okay, now that that's out of the way, now that I've told you the reason why I read the book, I can tell you that I have very little negativity to say about this book. I think that as a character piece, it's fascinating. The one thing that I think bothered me the most is there's this whole like subplot running through this book of Jack trying to figure out what happened in this hotel. He finds documents in the basement. He finds a his scrapbook of newspaper clippings about murders and gangland and Vegas crime lords, and he knows the story of Grady killing his family. And so there's this underthread of Jack trying to figure that story out, trying to figure out what happened in the hotel. And as the reader, it builds an expectation that we're going to learn how the hotel got its power. We're going to learn that, something horrific happened, and that's when this hotel started turning into an actual monster. That never happens. I mean, that's the biggest spoiler I can give you, is that we're never rewarded with any sort of explanation about how the hotel became what it is. The hotel is the fifth character of this book, and it's veiled in such a mystery that it's just a plot device. And that can be a little bit frustrating. I don't like it when I'm strung along to believe that I'm going to get some sort of payoff or satisfaction, and then it just doesn't happen because, Ultimately, I've heard of the hotel in this book being referred to as something out of H.P. Lovecraft, as this cosmic just evilness that exists so far outside of the capacity of humans to understand it that we're not supposed to figure out what caused the hotel to be what it is. It just is what it is, and it's so far beyond our reasoning we'll never know. It's just a place where bad stuff happens because that's what the cosmic background wanted to happen there. And that's fine. I just think that's kind of like a shitty, like, throwaway answer, where King teases throughout this book that there is something bigger going on. He just never gives it to you. And that can be frustrating. But I think Jack going down that path and becoming a little bit maddened by it, becoming a little bit... He starts to understand that bad things have happened here, and he catches glimpses of them, from peripheral vision or literally through some hallucinations. And that drives him even further into the story of the hotel. And maybe that story is the ultimate power. It drags him into it, and he eventually succumbs to it and can become drunk by it, and the hotel can act upon him. And so maybe that's all that really needed to happen. But for me, I would have liked to have seen that explained a little bit further. I think that Danny is an amazing character King wasn't old when he wrote this, but he was, I don't know, 30s? I don't know how old he was when he wrote this in the 70s. I think he's nearing 80, and so this book came out in 77. He was probably in his late 20s. I think that for a man of that age to write a 5-year-old so well, that's really remarkable, and it really speaks to how firm of a grasp he has on character. The 5-year-old boy in this book, when he needs to be 5 years old, he feels very 5 years old, but he also, because of his gift, because of The Shining, because he can read thoughts and he can understand things that 5-year-olds are not supposed to understand, he's also more mature than a normal 5-year-old boy. And King plays both of those sides of Danny really, really well. I mean, you really believe it. And that's remarkable. I think that's it. I think that as reading this book, I think I read it in 7 days or so. The last probably 4 chapters of my writing have dramatically improved because I've really gotten a sense of, okay, I'm not pulling the reader in enough. And this book pulls you in. This book really makes you feel like you're there. King really goes into a whole lot of detail. And when I say there, I don't mean in the hotel. He gives you a good amount of information about the hotel. Like, he gives you general floor plan layout, and he kind of glosses over some of the decorations. He talks a lot about the blue carpet, which, okay, it doesn't mean anything. He talks a little bit about some of the settings, but in other things, he just completely glosses over most of it. They walk into a giant stainless steel kitchen. We don't really need to know the rest, right? What I mean was when you're there, I said he makes you feel like you're there. I mean, he makes you feel like you're inside of the people that are living this tale. And he really lets you feel their thoughts and their emotions and their dissent. You really feel it. And that's, I think, the genius of The Shining. It's escapism to a bad place, but you feel good about it. That's it. That's my thoughts on The Shining. I give this a solid 9 out of 10. I don't know that I've ever had it. I've never read a 10. But I'll give that a 9 out of 10. It's a really damn good book. And I think that had I gotten that little extra payoff of knowing a little bit more about what was actually happening there, it would have been a 10. That's it. If you have any questions, put them in the comments. Any books you want me to read and report back, put them in the comments. You're probably getting tired of Stephen King at this point. I'm done with Stephen King for right now. I mean, I haven't read most of his work, but I think I'm going to finish this week. I'm going to try to just go strong on my book and hit the 50,000 word mark and try to maybe come up with an ending for it. And then from here, I'm going to take on some light kind of pulpy, maybe even cowboy books. And I really want to study them for structure and pacing. So that's going to be the next project. But if you want me to read something else and review it for you, let me know in the comments. Or if you want a buddy read something with me, let me know in the comments. We'll read something together. Thank you for being here as always. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, being amazing friends and wonderful people. I really appreciate you, and I will see you again tomorrow. Today's word you should know to sound smart is descant. It is a verb meaning to talk freely and without inhibition. Eloise is always more than willing to descant concerning her past liaisons. Descant. D-E-S-C-A-N-T. Descant. I've never heard that. Descant. I've always heard like candor. I guess that's not really the same thing because this literally says speaking with candor, right?